This conference will now be recorded.
Workers are in a phase of being footloose and fancy-free. That's according to a recent article by The Economist. The proportion of Americans leaving their jobs voluntarily is at a 17-year high. A survey by Gallup in 2017 found that around half of American employees were hoping to leave their current job. Employees are not sticking. Turnover is expensive, but how expensive? A 2016 survey by consulting firm Deloitte suggested that a combination of hiring costs and lost productivity added up to $121,000 per departing employee. Figures from the second quarter of 2018 showed that employee turnover in the American software sector was running at an annual rate of 24%, with 2/3 of those workers leaving voluntarily. With the current recruitment environment and the level of difficulty acquiring top candidates, employee turnover is a significant problem. Let's take this problem back to its roots, to hiring, and let's examine how bad hiring decisions are made and what can be done to avoid mishiring and ultimately reduce turnover. This is the RPOA Leadership Forum, and that's our topic for today. Welcome to the conversation. My name is Lemis Aburama. I'm the proud president of the RPOA and your host for today. I'm thrilled to be joined by an esteemed panel of talent acquisition experts who will share their thoughts on our topic. To help us with the conversation, we are delighted to be joined by a seasoned talent acquisition leader, speaker, and consultant. She's someone who worked at both sides of the aisle for some of the most successful organizations in the world. She's seriously passionate about global hiring and recruitment process outsourcing. Currently the host of a podcast called Big Fish in the Talent Pool, where she shares meaningful conversations with some talent acquisition top executives from Fortune 500 companies in what she describes as paying it forward to the next generation of talent acquisition professionals. I'm honored to present to you Erin McDermott Pearson.
Thank you, Lemis.
Welcome.
Very good to be with you today, and thanks so much for allowing me to be a part of this webinar to address a really important topic of how to avoid bad hires. I have with me an esteemed panel as well, and I'd like to be able to introduce them to you now. First of all, I have Pam Verhoff, Advanced RPO President. Pam is an accomplished executive leader and has extensive experience building RPO businesses and solutions, as well as developing growth strategy. Pam is responsible for all aspects of strategic hiring, planning, sales and marketing, and operations, as well as financial management and compliance for Advanced RPO. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Erin.
Talking to us this morning from Findlay, Ohio, so we're glad to have you on the panel. Okay, next we have Corey Cruz from Orion Novotis, right here with me in Austin, Texas. And Corey is the president of and talent acquisition leader with over 15 years of experience guiding top-tier companies and managing talent acquisition programs, leading both national and international RPO engagements for companies such as Superior Energy Services, Vignette Corporation, Jevity, KB Home, and Intuit. The international part of that certainly is where my heart beats as well, Corey, so I'm happy to welcome you to the panel today.
Thank you, Erin. It's good to be in Austin and good to be here.
Great. Okay, we're moving on to Jason Crumweedy with Talent Rise, talking to us from beautiful Chicago, Illinois, where I also spent quite a long time of my career. He is with Talent Rise. He is the partner and RPO practice leader for that great organization. And he brings us 20 years of leadership, business development, consulting, and management experience in talent acquisition and human capital services. As a trusted advisor, his goal is to help clients realize efficiencies in recruiting and staffing by identifying ways to scale and standardize through innovative, value-based solutions. And I know that personally because he and I work together at Aon Hewitt. So great to see you again, Jason. Thanks for joining the panel.
Thanks, Erin. Great to see you again, and looking forward to the conversation.
All right, great. And finally, Bill Boutwell. Bill is joining us from Jacksonville, Florida. He's the Chief Operating Officer at Hueman, and he is the co-founder of Hueman, actually, an award-winning recruitment process outsourcing company. Bill has been in the recruitment space for more than 20 years. He's a veteran also of the U.S. Marine Corps. Thank you, Bill, for your service. We appreciate it. And he's the strategic operations leader for Hueman's RPO division, which includes over 100 recruiters for 20 accounts in industries ranging from healthcare and technology to food and labor markets. So thank you, Bill, for joining us. We're really glad to have you on board today.
Thanks, Erin. I'm excited to be here and humbled to be on a panel with this pedigree.
I think we all feel the same. So that is a great summary statement. And with that, we'll jump right into our questions. And the way we're going to do this is sort of break it up between responders here. And I think you'll get a sense of what we're tackling here is actually a really challenging issue of we all, whether we're in the corporate realm or RPO, we all want to hire the best people. We want to hire people who are going to last for the organizations that we're serving. And we want to do that in an organized way. So let's dig in. Let's talk about how to get that done in the best way. This question is for Jason and Pam. So in your opinion, what is the primary reason bad hiring decisions get made?
Well, Erin, I'll jump in and Pam fill in the gaps here. But for me, as an RPO provider and an extension of our clients' HR and talent acquisition team, we're enabling and advising our clients and to make great hiring decisions. I think for our teams, it really starts with the job description and advising and working with the clients and to make sure they've got it figured out that they understand the skills and the competencies that they want to hire for, and it's forward-looking. A lot of times job descriptions can be written 3 to 5 years ago. They're old, they're dated, and I think the speed to which clients are moving and the pace of which business is moving, a lot of times it's just very dated. And they may not be they're looking at past skills that they need and referring to those rather than just being forward looking and what's the potential in that client. So, pardon me, in that candidate that they want to hire. So it really, for me, it all starts with the job description, and it's the old adage really applies here. If garbage in, garbage out. If your RPO team is starting with a poor job description, it's really hard to it's really hard for that recruiter to hire somebody great into that role. So that's inevitably that's what happens. So we start with that intake session, especially if you're starting with a poor job description. How do you pivot with that hiring manager to make sure they're thinking about the skills, the core competencies? We all run into the must-haves that are essential for this job and really digging a little deeper to understand what are the core things that are going to be essential for that role. So those are kind of really starting with that job description is really critically important to make sure you're avoiding bad hiring decisions.
Great point. And I know a lot of organizations are starting to think differently about the job description versus the job ad, or sort of what gets posted online. So we might have a chance to get into that a little more as well. Pam, what's your thought on this topic? The primary reason that bad hiring decisions get made sometimes.
I'm right there with Jason, and I really look at the job profile. So, job description is one thing, and that's got a lot of HR formalities around. So So as we're working with customers, we really talk about the job profile, which is to your point, maybe what we advertise, which might be a little bit different than the actual description itself, but really ensuring that the hiring manager really is very articulate around what that profile needs to be. So to Jason's point, the recruiters can go out and actually identify those candidates. And one of the traps that I see hiring managers fall into at times, they may have the right profile, but they encounter a candidate that just really wows them, that they may have a presence about themselves that allows them to sell themselves in a way that's may or may not be aligned with the actual position itself. And so it's really important that the recruiter recognize that and really work with the manager to keep them on track and hiring actually to that profile. The one other item that I see happen a lot, and reality is such that sometimes the timing drives hiring managers to make a bad decision. Again, it's the recruiter's responsibility to keep them informed and help keep them aligned to the profile regardless of the time frame in which they're working.
I agree, Pam. I think you don't want to let time to fill metrics get in the way of making a decision too quickly.
Right.
Yeah, totally agree. And so real quickly, do your firms have tools that help enhance the job description, or is it really just more of a custom deal when you sit down to do the intake?
It's a combination of both.
Oh.
Sorry, go ahead, Pam.
I was to say I can speak to in our case, it depends on the customer. We will put in scope working directly with their HR business partner and really writing the job descriptions, if you will. I would say that's probably 30% of our overall customers, and the remaining 70% we're really focused on that profile, which is what we are taking to market.
Okay, great. Jason, did you have a?
Oh, I was just going to comment. We do a combination of both. Many of our clients already have competencies. A job profile is written. A lot of times it's less is more, paring that down. So it's really kind of focused on that job and what is success going to look like for that new hire.
Good. Thank you for that. I completely agree. Okay, next question. And this is a tough one because there's many things we need to get right, but I'm going to ask you to narrow it down. And this question is for Bill and Corey. Bill, why don't you start us out and tell us, what do you think is the single most important thing that the talent acquisition team needs to get right if they want to avoid hires that don't last?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is a tough question because there are so many things. And I would say beyond anything else, they need to evaluate their entire hiring process from the applied process to the hire, make sure it's a great candidate experience. Beyond that, I'll get a little more specific, and I'll say that it's to move into a direction where you're hiring more for a value and culture match to the organization, and maybe even specifically to the area that the employee is ultimately going to be working in, as opposed to hiring too much for X's and O's. I think talent acquisition needs to consult with hiring managers and teach them how to do a better job of interviewing for those sort of softer skills, because they can read in either in a resume or in a recruiter submission write-up sort of the experience of the candidate, what their background is. But what they really need to do is drill down and identify, is this person going to, how is their outlook and how is their personality going to work with the folks that they're going to be engaged with and working alongside with every day. If you don't have that, then you can have somebody, the most experienced candidate in the world. If they don't fit with the environment, if they don't align with where the organization is going and with the core values, it's not going to last.
Yeah, that goes along the lines of, the whole adage of culture eats strategy for lunch. I would say culture eats process for lunch in terms of talent acquisition. Yeah. So true if they're not a good culture fit. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay, Corey. Oh, sounds like we've got you on mute.
I'm here.
Yeah.
All great points and valid and absolutely necessary. There is absolutely no substitute for a stellar candidate experience. And with that, the TA team has to ensure alignment with the hiring manager and the candidate all the way through. And, starting with the basis, if you fail to plan to fail. So intake, job specifications, and the biggest one that we see and that we're really focusing on is desired outcome of that hire. And then really reverse engineering the behaviors necessary, the activities necessary for that person to be successful in that job. And that, that can be measured in hard skills, and then you have to move over into the soft skills. Do they communicate? Does their style fit with the team? Are they a cultural alignment? And so you just have to get the towards right. You gotta have everything aligned in order to take out the variables or the influencers that would deflect from having that hire be a productive one.
So I hear you emphasizing more the assessment component, especially the interview part of the assessment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see, if I can just add here, we see it across the board. I mean, some, best in class have pretty stellar process that they work in some different exercises and such. But at the end of the day, like I'll give you an example. If I'm hiring a senior level recruiter, I can't go based on just merit alone or past histories. I'll sit that person down and have them teach me how to do something that is critical to them carrying out their job, or critical to how we do things, or the desired outcome. So there's a lot of different things beyond just assessments that can help probe for those behaviors that would be conducive to somebody being productive. And I encourage everybody to take a look at their hiring practices and make sure that you're integrating those things that are going to help take those influencers out.
Hey, wow, I love that approach. I'm just curious, do you forewarn your candidates before they come to interview you that you're going to ask them to teach you something?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so they're able to sort of prepare and or choose what they're going to teach
We
you?
do both. So we'll pick out a subject or something that is critical, that is more or less general, and then we'll drill down ad hoc when a candidate's here based on what they're telling us. So if somebody says that they're really good at Boolean search strings and they're an expert, then we'll have them teach us how to do some advanced Boolean searches.
Got it. Okay, so avoiding that issue that's sometimes created by self-reporting, I can do this, I can do that, I've done this before. You're looking for the evidence.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Wow, interesting. All right, moving on. And this actually kind of grabs onto the earlier topic of assessment. And I would love to hear from Corey and Pam on this one. Corey, first, if you could design the perfect assessment process to avoid mishiring, what would it include?
The perfect assessment would be a candidate spending a day on the job and being served up some work that they've got to go complete. I don't think that there's a lot that would show more than the prospective candidate doing the actual work, whether it would be, doing something technical that's going to be required, writing code, working on a manufacturing line, working with a piece of software, delivering a sales pitch, whatever that may be. On the job demonstration is probably the number one thing that I would look for.
Right. Sounds like you put your money where your mouth is too. So that's awesome. Pam, what would you say? Oh, sorry. Was there?
And I was just going to say, I was going to ask a follow-up question to Corey in terms of when you're working with your customers, use the manufacturing example. Are there tools that you might suggest, absent bringing somebody into the facility and actually having them, work on the line, if you will.
Yeah, there's some general tools that will capture maybe some that will capture more general, can they do these basic skills, but then there's specialty assessments out there that will drill down, whether that's electronics manufacturing or food processing and things like this. There's things out in the market that can be implemented that are short and sweet, and that will give you kind of a benchmark or a data point for that specific candidate.
Great. And I agree 100%. And at the end of the day, ultimately, observing them actually doing the task is the best assessment there is. In a lot of cases, we don't have that opportunity with our customers. So I would answer, it really depends on the level of the position in which we're screening for. And I will assume, if I'm assuming we're hiring a mid-level professional, I'd like to see some bit of profiling done. And we actually use a tool quite frequently, which is the predictive index, which is, it really just provides motivating factors of a candidate, and then you see how well that aligns with the particular role in which we're screening for. And we don't use it as a knockout in most cases. It's just simply, it gives us it helps us better understand the profile of a candidate in which we can then continue to probe and screen effectively for the role. We also do a lot of video interviewing for I'm thinking more mid-level professional type of roles. It does allow us to assess, if you will, the candidate's, ability to simply use technology. And every role that, we hire for today, there's some use of technology, right? And then it also allows us to observe their ability to really engage with individuals in which, they're speaking with and such. So those are a couple of tools that come to mind as I'm thinking about more of a mid-level professional.
That's a good point. Let me just tail on what Pam said, and then I'll wrap up. So the whole candidate experience and interview process, from the first time a recruiter or somebody internal or external touches the candidate, that's when the interview process starts and the assessment process starts. How do they communicate? How do they navigate through the process? And all of that should be taken into consideration. I've seen multiple instances where companies or recruiters wish candidates into the position. They'll make concessions for candidates along the way because of time and labor pressure. And so, take into consideration that from when you start the process with them, they're in the interview process.
Yeah, great point. And of course, that affects candidate experience too, but really appreciate that point about, and if it's okay, I'd like to go back to, Pam, your mention of using video interviewing for mid-level folks. And I know some of the providers are adding on AI these days so that they can assess not only what the person's saying, but how their body language is communicating various things. And I wonder if we aren't stepping into the age where we could use video interviewing both at the front end as a, kind of a primary screen for culture, and or, the softer side of things, as we mentioned earlier. I'm also talking to some of my clients about using it for more senior level hires. So actually, doing the two-way recorded interview and then using that to be able to read in other people who need to be able to weigh in on the candidate without that laborious scheduling of interviews on calendars who have no time. So what thoughts do you have about that?
Absolutely, and we have used it in both ways. So a video on demand versus a live video, and both have been very effective. I think when I think about the use cases we have with existing customers, I tie it back to their culture and what they're most comfortable with, right? We do have several clients that they prefer it to be live, knowing that it is sometimes difficult to schedule, but they like to capture that
Right.
they feel that gives them more the real essence of who the individual is. Versus, again, we do have other customers that we do push it out on demand, allow them to, they video on their time and send it back. And again, that allows many people to view it and so on and so forth. So absolutely seeing use in both cases and at all levels, from very low level to very senior levels.
Love it. I love it. I think our assumption is that we shouldn't burden senior level candidates with video. Why not? They got to use technology too, right? So good.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you for
And
that.
it just lessens, I think you're right. It lessens the burden on a senior level candidate and doesn't waste their time as well. Like the travel into a client, into an interview, they're busy as well. So I think from a candidate experience, which Corey was talking about earlier, I think it's a great accelerator.
Right. Agreed.
The other side to that coin too is that it actually brings some dimension. A candidate is very one-dimensional in a profile that's submitted to a hiring manager, whereas when you submit a video interview, even if it's an on-demand, just sort of them introducing themselves, it adds the texture that is oftentimes needed and missed by reviewing a resume.
Right. So true. And give them a chance to tell their story, right? So that's the key. Right. Good. All right, moving on to, this is a tough question. Jason and Bill, I'll ask you to weigh in on it, if you will. How do you measure candidate quality with your clients? It's the holy grail, I think, in many organizations. How do we measure quality? And then how is that connected with how your clients measure quality in the hire down the road? So Jason, I'll ask you to weigh in first.
A two-part question. I think the candidate quality is fairly straightforward. I think there's lots of different ways to measure it. But it's first starting with our clients and how do they define quality, internally within the organization. So we certainly have our points of view, but it's most important what do the client thinks in terms of quality, and making sure we're kind of following those. So I think candidate submission ratios and acceptance ratios, or candidate to conversion to an interview, on-site interviews, are things or KPIs that we would typically measure, just looking for trends, especially for high volume clients where you can see a lot of the data flowing through. An example for a technology client that we have would be, a candidate submittal ratio or conversion to an interview would be a KPI of 80%. So 80% of those submissions are converting into interviews. We're currently tracking in the high 80s with them, so that would be more of the sourcing metrics flow through, and then I think most important would be the interview to offer ratios, which I think we all certainly are measuring across this esteemed panel, which would, interviews that are converting to offers. And I think it's a balancing act. We would typically shoot for that 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, but clients want choices too. So I think sometimes when you pare that down to a 2-to-1 or a 1-to-1, they inevitably want to see more candidates because they can make a better choice. So, on the new hire side, we would typically measure early turnover is something that we're measuring, especially as far as recruitment goes. Sometimes we can be impacted or looked at for turnover, but I think the early turnover metric really sets in terms of what's recruiting doing, because if you look further downstream or long term, if there's a poor onboarding process or poor training, or hiring managers not that adept, those certainly can impact things as well.
Right. And do you have a particular time frame at which you cut it off, Jason? Sort of 3 months, 2 months? I
think it's in collab. It's a good question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying. At what point do you feel the RPO has sort of ended their responsibility for that quality of hiring?
A lot of times it's in collaboration with the client and helping them define it. Typically, though, for high volume roles, you would look at 30 days. Let's say for a mid-career professional, 60 days is probably a decent time frame. Clients have different perspectives on that as well. Additionally to turnover, I think hiring manager satisfaction surveys are a great way to collect data, especially the first 90 days that they're on the job. We're always shooting for the holy grail of performance, getting performance data and tying it back to recruitment. it's just it's hard to execute that last one in terms of getting performance data and tying it back to, let's say, the work that we're doing. So from a new hire, would typically focus on turnover, hiring manager satisfaction, any other anecdotes that we're collecting on a regular basis.
Okay, Bill, how do you see it differently?
Sure. Well, I don't know that I see it a whole lot differently. I can say a lot of probably similar things to Jason. It's just, this is such a challenging one because we all know that so much of the ultimate success of a hire really boils down to how they're embraced and hugged by the organization once they begin. You can have a great candidate. If you put them into a bad situation, it's a hire that may not last and ultimately be viewed as a failure. So we look at several different things. We don't try to tie them together and create a composite score or a ranking, but like Jason, we'll look at some metrics. A lot of recruitment metrics. We'll look at presentation to hire, presentation to interview. That will talk about hiring managers' satisfaction with what they're seeing. It'll talk about choice. It also interesting will identify maybe some roadblocks in the systems. If you're humming right along and you have 3-to-1, 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 and you have one hiring manager where it's 8-to-1 or department, it can point to an inefficiency as well. But beyond those metrics, we have a proprietary form. I say that a little bit tongue in cheek. We call it the Robo Recruit form, and it's designed to measure the perfect candidate. You all remember Robo Recruit, the movie from the 80s. And we look at hard skills and then we look at soft skills, and we'll identify a candidate within the organization for a role and say, who's your superstar? And we'll build a form to evaluate all of our talent pool against that superstar. And then they'll get a ranking against all other candidates in the pool and against that perfect candidate. And that gives us some semblance. It's very subjective, obviously. There's a little bit of objectivity to it, but there's a lot of subjectivity involved. And then the final thing we look at is we do look at the short-term turnover a lot. Depending on the role, sometimes 30-day turnover is appropriate, sometimes 90. That will go to level of job. But we pretty much cut it off there. And if clients want to engage in a conversation of tying long-term performance to what's going on with the RPO partnership, we really try to turn that conversation to culture. And we'll do surveys, new hire surveys. Let's evaluate from how a candidate applies, how they're treated by recruitment, how they're treated by HR through onboarding, how they're treated by hiring managers through orientation and coworkers. And let's talk about changing the dynamics that will make people feel good and supported the right way and want to stay with the organization long term. Again, we're a little bit different in that we don't put as much credence in. Obviously depends on the job, but in terms of the background and the hard skills, and we really are advocates of hiring the person first and then working them into the role appropriately. Because if you get good people, you get winners on your team, you're going to have good, successful employees and good outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate your mention of the onboarding process. And I think as the provider, we don't often feel like we have a lot of control over the onboarding, but it matters, doesn't it? And so to the extent that we encourage our clients to really make that stellar, I think it helps everybody in the ecosystem for sure. So good. Thank you for that, Bill. Appreciate it. And okay, so we have one final question, and I want everyone to weigh in on this, please. And I'll start with Pam and ask you to cover what's one practical tip that you can offer to our audience on ensuring quality hires and avoiding those darn mishires?
You just touched on it. I am thinking about, a topic we haven't really touched on too deeply yet, and it is onboarding. So I think, make sure you have an effective onboarding process, structured training or check-in for the first at least 90 days. Studies do continue to reveal data that reinforces the need to effectively onboard and train new hires. So, I think even the most experienced hires ramp more quickly if they're effectively enculturated into the new organization. So that is, in my opinion, equally as important as identifying, the right person to bring them into the system.
Great. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think it's sort of the tactical enablement stuff, just having the laptop ready when the person joins.
Oh, sure.
Then, oh, by the way, the more touchy-feely side, which is what I'm hearing more and more clients talk about, which is the concept of belonging. So it's kind of the next
Right.
generation beyond inclusion and diversity of, many different kinds, and it's belonging. Like, how do we help people feel like they belong? It's huge. Okay.
There's also just a common set of foundational things that you can execute on, and it doesn't matter whether you're hiring oil field workers in the Permian Basin or executives on in New York City. There's a common set. So you've got to plan out the candidate experience, and you've got to get everybody on the same page, meaning there's typically multiple people involved in the assessment or the interview process. So do a little upfront work and make sure that everybody has their role in assessing the candidate, that 4 people aren't asking the candidate the same questions and then there's no feedback session. Drive a formal feedback session. Have some sort of methodology that you use to ensure that when you make that decision, there's a basis to that decision. And so, there's some things that everybody can do right now to just tighten up their process, get consistent, and when you go to pull the trigger on new talent, there's some alignment there.
Corey, it's a great point. And I'm just curious, to what extent, when you have a new client who maybe doesn't have that sort of a structured process, do you try and influence it as their provider?
Absolutely. We influence it right off the bat, whether it's very basic, whether they had nothing, and then we the entry point is very basic. We get hiring managers trained. We introduce some behavioral-based interviewing or whatever's appropriate. We drive feedback methodologies and debriefs, and then ultimately, here's how they make a decision. Here's how they archive that. And all of that, too, is used to manage that candidate when they become an employee. How did they react in certain situations? So we'll introduce that either in a basic way or a very sophisticated way, depending on the client and their need.
Okay. All in the spirit of getting a good hire and hopefully avoiding a mishire, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Jason or Bill, what thoughts do you have about a practical tip to ensure quality hires?
Jason, if you don't mind, I'll start. And I'll say, a lot of good things have been touched on today. If there's one thing maybe that we haven't really talked about is maybe having recruitment staff to adequately staff to appropriately pre-screen candidates. If you want to have your hiring managers engage the right way and be responsive enough, they really need to trust that the candidates that are being submitted to them, put in front of them, are qualified to do the job. If recruiters are not screening, if they're just pushing resumes and managers are put into the position of being screeners, they're going to focus on all the wrong things in an interview, and you're not going to have quite the outcomes that you want to have.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, I mean, it all starts with the sourcing and screening, doesn't it?
It does.
Good. Thank you for that. Jason, what about you? What final thoughts do you have?
Couldn't agree more, Bill, on that. I think just one kind of term that I use, not term, but saying that I use for clients, with clients on this thing is wait for the slate. Wait for the candidate slate. And the reason I recommend that is hiring leaders make better hiring. They make better decisions when they have choices, especially within close proximity of each other. Let's say interviewing a candidate within 3 days. And I think if you wait for a slate of candidates, over a few days to just make a good hiring decision. We've seen that time and time again. And sometimes the drip method, where there's urgency to fill the job, you send over a top candidate, let's say within a couple of weeks time. And then there's that you've got to wait, right? They've interviewed the candidate, they like them, but we want to see a couple of more. And so I just recommend wait for the slate. Be patient, especially let the sourcing team do their work, engage with candidates, especially for passive level, mid-level, professional level jobs. Let that process work through it, and inevitably it will speed it up in the end. So wait for the slate.
Wow, I like that phrase. I'm definitely gonna borrow that. Hope that's okay.
That's a good phrase.
So I think that really tells the story. I mean, what we all know is the funnel is definitely a significant icon in the work that we do in talent acquisition. And what we've heard is comments all the way from branding and attraction that actually paints the picture of the culture, which is really important to make sure that the hire is a good one or an appropriate one for the organization. And then, of course, the sourcing, screening. You got to get a good assessment. You got to have great onboarding. Guess what, Lamise? The answer to how to avoid a mishire is do everything right. Manage.
Drum roll, please.
Yeah.
All that. So this little tongue in cheek, but it's so true. And you just, an article I just recently wrote was, talent acquisition. How hard can it be? Actually, it's really hard. And so I think that's why we all exist and our organizations are as busy as we are, because it needs to be done right. So hopefully this has been helpful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all. Absolutely very helpful. And I can't believe the insight that we have from all of you, and as well as the incredible work that you do for your clients. I know as an association, we strive to make organizations better and helping them reach their highest potential through people. And I know that's what you do as well. So I want to thank you all on behalf of the RPOA for being with us. And thank you all, our audience, for being with us today. Erin, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Have a great day, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.